They sprayed the words, "Go back to where you came from," across his locker in red paint, and the school handed him paper towels to clean it up himself. That was the moment everything shifted. Not because it was the first act of hatred, but because it was the last time he stayed silent. This isn't a feel-good story wrapped in polite injustice. It's a storm, the kind that brews for years beneath polished hallways and framed alumni photos, where silence is a strategy and cruelty wears a smile. Two brothers walked into Elden Crest Academy with brilliance carved into their bones. But the school only saw the color of their skin, not the medals they'd earned, the innovations they'd built, or the truth they carried like armor. They were mocked, sidelined, humiliated, called help in the dining hall, shut out of clubs they outqualified, blamed for crimes they didn't commit. Not because they weren't enough, but because they were too much for a system built to exclude. What the school didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was who these boys really were. And when the truth broke through, it didn't just level the playing field. It burned it down. You think this is just about school? It never was. This is about legacy, justice, and the moment when two young black students stopped asking for permission and started rewriting the rules. So tell me, where are you watching this from? What would you have done if it were you cleaning that locker? Drop your thoughts below, hit subscribe, and stay locked in, because the reckoning is just getting started. Elden Crest Academy didn't look like a school. It looked like a monument. Ivy-draped stone towers rose against the overcast sky, stoic and cold like the silence that often blanketed the halls within. The school was old, prestigious, and fiercely proud of its traditions, most of which were written not in handbooks, but in bloodlines. And for brothers Malik and Malachi Harris, stepping onto its grounds for the first time felt like walking into enemy territory dressed in a uniform someone else had already claimed. Their steps were measured, their backs straight, but the stares they drew were far from subtle. It wasn't the curiosity reserved for newcomers. It was something sharper, something that looked like quiet disapproval, hidden behind polite expressions. Their first class was American literature, held in a high-ceilinged room with large bay windows that filtered soft light over rows of oak desks. The teacher, Mr. Bramwell, was a narrow-eyed man with a blazer 2 sizes too big and a voice that carried more condescension than conviction. He didn't look up when the twins entered. "Grab 2 seats in the back," he said, already writing on the whiteboard. Malik and Malachi shared a glance, but obeyed silently. They passed rows of well-dressed students, the boys in polished loafers, the girls in expensive wool skirts, all of whom watched them like anomalies, like misplaced pieces in a puzzle they thought they had finished years ago. Mr. Bramwell finally turned around, squinting at his attendance list. "Malik and Malachi," he pronounced it like a question, not a name. Malik raised his hand. "It's Malachi, sir." "Mr. Bramwell blinked, unimpressed. "Right. I'm not going to remember who's who between you two, so just one of you raise your hand when I call on Harris." The room chuckled. Someone whispered, "Does it really matter?" The boys didn't flinch, didn't argue. They had already agreed before stepping foot into this school. They wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing a reaction. At lunch, things didn't improve. The cafeteria was a cathedral of whispered judgment and polished silverware. Students sat at long wooden tables, grouped by invisible lines of wealth and legacy. Malik and Malachi sat at the far end of a near-empty table. Trays clattered around them, and though the room buzzed with conversation, their space felt like a bubble no one wanted to enter. A tall boy with sandy hair and a jawline carved from entitlement passed by and muttered just loud enough, "Didn't know they let the janitors' kids eat with us now." Malik looked up slowly, but Malachi shook his head, subtle and calm. Later that afternoon, the twins were assigned lockers. As they turned the combination dials, a girl walked by, glanced at Malik's locker tag, and smirked. "Did they print those names right? I mean, Harris could be anyone. Maybe you two could just go by 1 and 2. Her friend snorted. Malik forced a thin smile and said nothing. It was all part of it. The testing, the poking, the subtle way people tried to shrink them down until they fit inside the box they'd already been placed in. Their math teacher, Mr. Redford, was no better. On the second day of class, He handed back graded quizzes. Malachi's paper had a giant red C scribbled across the top. He blinked. He'd double-checked every problem. Malik's grade? Also a C. They exchanged papers just to see if they'd mixed up their names. Same handwriting, same answers, same mark. When Malachi approached Mr. Redford after class, he received a shrug. Maybe try studying more. Not everyone's naturally gifted in this environment. By Friday, Malik was already exhausted, not physically but emotionally. He noticed it in small things. How people glanced away when they passed, how no one asked to pair up with them during group activities, how their desks were always the last to be chosen during rearrangements. They had become invisible where it counted and hypervisible where it hurt. On the way to gym class, they passed a trophy case gleaming with plaques and medals. One photo caught Malik's eye, a row of young white boys in football jerseys, arms around each other, grinning beneath the bold caption, "Elden's Future." Malachi stood next to him, reading the names aloud. Chase Langford, Vincent Carr, Grant Holloway. All legacy. All untouchable, Malik muttered. And that, perhaps, was the unspoken truth of Elden Crest. It didn't matter how smart you were, how disciplined, how much you could contribute. If you didn't come from the right family, with the right skin, you were already 3 moves behind on a board you weren't even invited to play on. In gym class, the twins were asked to separate. "We'll split by last names," Coach Donovan called. "L on the left, MZ on the right." Malik and Malachi stood up and walked to opposite sides. The coach frowned. "Are you two related?" "We're twins," Malik replied. "Interesting," Coach muttered. "Just try not to confuse anyone. You all look the same when you're wearing the same jerseys." The students laughed, louder this time. No one was pretending to whisper anymore. That night, Malik sat on his dorm bed, lacing and unlacing his shoes. Malachi was typing on his laptop silently. "You think it's going to be like this every day?" Malik asked. Malachi didn't look up. "Worse, probably. Until it's not." Malik tilted his head. "And when is that?" Malachi finally looked at him. "When they realize we're not what they think we are." Malik exhaled slowly. "That could take a while." Malachi's eyes narrowed, calm and razor-sharp. "Then we'll outlast them. That's what we do." Saturday morning brought with it the first parent appreciation brunch of the semester, a grand affair that transformed Elden Crest's dining hall into something that looked more like a private club than a school facility. Crystal pitchers of imported juice gleamed in the sunlight, while servers in white gloves floated between long tables with perfect posture. Malik and Malachi had no intention of attending. They weren't required to. But when their dorm advisor recommended they show face as scholarship recipients, they reluctantly dressed in their crested blazers and navy ties, blending into a crowd that still refused to see them. Malik arrived earlier, assigned to help with logistics for extra credit. He wasn't part of the service staff, but his presence near the refreshment table made him look useful, and perhaps that was all it took. He was adjusting the stack of small white plates, one hand still gripping a paper with instructions from his teacher, when an older woman in a designer shawl and oversized pearls tapped him lightly on the shoulder. "Excuse me," she said without looking at his face. "Could you clear the table near the bay window? It's absolutely cluttered." Malik turned, blinking. "Ma'am, I'm a student here." She looked up, pausing just long enough for the recognition to flicker, and then vanish. "Oh," she replied with an indifferent smile. "Scholarship, then?" Malik didn't respond. Not with words. He gave a slight nod, not confirming, not denying, and stepped away. Her assumption clung to him like static, crackling quietly even after he was gone. Meanwhile, Malachi had decided to visit the Student Activities Hall to register for extracurriculars. He had done his research. The robotics club at Elden Crest had a history of producing winners at the state level. Their workshop, located in the West Wing, was outfitted with cutting-edge tools and housed projects going back a decade. He stepped into the open door, nodding politely to the students inside, and approached the registration table where a tall man in a charcoal sweater stood flipping through forms. "Hi," Malachi said. "I'm interested in joining." The man glanced up, giving him a quick once-over, before glancing back down at his clipboard. Do you have prior experience? I built a drone that won first at the Capital State Tech Fair, Malachi answered, careful to keep his tone neutral. The man's lips pressed together in a faint smile that never reached his eyes. We generally prioritize students with foundational training, private mentorships, competition records through affiliated academies. The real prep pipelines, you know? Malachi raised a brow. I just told you I won a state fair. Yes, but those are very different levels of exposure, the man said calmly. We need to make sure the group maintains its standards. Behind him, two boys, one with a Stanford hoodie, the other holding a robot chassis, watched the exchange with muted interest. One of them leaned over and whispered something that made the other stifle a laugh. Malachi didn't flinch. He nodded slowly. Understood, he said, stepping back. He wasn't unfamiliar with closed doors. He just hadn't expected them to be this polished. Later that day, the twins regrouped outside near the sculpture garden, a manicured space where perfectly trimmed hedges framed bronze busts of benefactors long gone. Malik recounted his cafeteria encounter. She called me staff, he said, tossing a pebble toward the koi pond. Didn't even flinch when I said I was a student. Malachi nodded, his hands in his pockets. They don't care about your name, your story, or your work. Only what they assume when they look at you. Malik gave a bitter chuckle. And they assume we don't belong. We do, Malachi said, eyes fixed on the glinting statues. But we'll have to remind them. That reminder, however, was easier said than done. Over the next week, the twins were met with a string of small indignities. In chemistry, their lab partner accidentally forgot to include their names on the project report. In history, the teacher never called on them during discussion, even when their hands were the only ones raised. Malik overheard one of the upperclassmen joking near the dorm elevators. Do you think they have a manual somewhere? Like how to talk proper, how to tie the tie, how not to scare donors. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was sharp, like glass breaking far away, but still dangerous to walk on. One afternoon, Malik stood outside the school library, reading a plaque dedicated to an alumnus who had donated the new digital wing. He was approached by a junior named Carson, who was part of the Elden Crest Orientation Committee. You know, Carson said casually, nodding toward the plaque. Most students don't bother reading those. But I guess for someone like you, history's probably a big deal. Malik turned slowly. Someone like me? Carson didn't miss a beat. First-generation scholar. New blood. You've got to make it count, right? I thought all students were supposed to care about legacy, Malik replied. Carson laughed. We care because we are the legacy. You care because you're trying to survive in it. That night, Malachi sat cross-legged on his bed, a pile of scholarship essays he'd written the year before spread around him. They don't see us as students, he murmured. They see us as placeholders. Malik didn't answer immediately. He was sitting by the window, watching the dorm lights flicker across campus like fireflies. What if we don't give them what they expect? He asked. Malachi looked up. What do you mean? What if we don't raise our hands? Don't smile back? Don't apologize when they step on our feet? His voice was steady. What if we don't play by their script? Then they'll try to write us out completely, Malachi said. Maybe, Malik replied. Or maybe they'll finally have to read what we actually wrote. The next morning, as the cafeteria filled with the scent of syrup and scrambled eggs, Malik walked past the same woman from the brunch. She was seated at a corner table with a new parent, laughing quietly over coffee. She caught sight of him, paused for half a breath, then turned back to her companion without a word. Malik didn't stop. He didn't flinch. But his mind was already turning towards something deeper than revenge. Something colder. A plan. Malik knew something was off the moment he walked into the gym locker room and saw Vincent Langford sitting on the bench, lacing his pristine sneakers too slowly, like he was waiting. There was a specific stillness in the air, tight, controlled, like a trap about to spring. Malik nodded curtly, slung his duffel bag onto the metal bench opposite Vincent, and began changing his shoes without a word. Vincent looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes, didn't intend to. "Big game Friday," he said casually, his voice smooth and practiced. "You should come watch. Even sit on the bench. Soak in the experience." Malik didn't respond. He knew Vincent wasn't inviting him out of camaraderie. It was mockery dressed as generosity. Everyone knew Malik hadn't been invited to try out for the basketball team despite his near-perfect stats in physical evaluation. No one had to say it. The silence around the decision spoke loud enough. Vincent's smile lingered before he stood and stretched dramatically. "Anyway," he said, brushing non-existent dust off his sleeve, "good talk." And then he left. Malik glanced around warily, but found nothing unusual, until he picked up his bag and noticed it felt heavier than before. Too heavy. 2 hours later, Malik was sitting stiffly outside the administrative office, his heart pounding low and steady like a war drum. Across from him, a security guard stood with crossed arms, stone-faced, holding the gym's lost and found binder. He hadn't said a word, but the weight of his presence said plenty. Inside the office, Headmaster Aldridge's voice filtered through the door, measured, formal, but carrying that distinct undertone of control. The kind of control built by years of knowing the system always leaned in your favor. Malik's fingers curled tightly around the edge of the wooden bench as the door finally creaked open. "Mr. Harris," came the voice of Dean Killian, a gaunt man with gold-rimmed glasses and a clipboard always within reach. "Come in, please." Malik stepped into the room, trying to keep his shoulders straight, his expression unreadable. Headmaster Aldridge sat behind his mahogany desk, arms folded, flanked by Coach Donovan on one side and the school's security supervisor on the other. In the center of the desk lay a velvet-lined case. Inside it, a silver family crest ring. Ornate, old, obviously expensive. "Do you recognize this item?" Aldridge asked, steepling his fingers. Malik blinked. "No, sir. It was found in your gym bag." Malik's breath caught for a second. "That's impossible." Aldridge's eyes narrowed slightly. "And yet it was there. This ring belongs to Mr. Vincent Langford. It has been in his family for 3 generations. When he reported it missing this morning, we conducted a check based on locker assignments and surveillance. The cameras showed you and him as the last 2 students in the gym." Malik hesitated. "I never touched his bag. I never went near it." "Be that as it may," Dean Killian interjected, "per school policy, items of significant value found in a student's possession without explanation are grounds for disciplinary review." "Are you accusing me of stealing?" Malik asked, the calm in his voice beginning to strain. "No one said that," Aldridge replied, too smoothly. "We're simply following procedure. You'll remain under temporary suspension until we finish reviewing the footage." Malik stared at them all, feeling the noose tighten, not of guilt, but of accusation, expectation, presumption. He opened his mouth to speak, but a knock at the door interrupted him. Malachi entered without waiting for permission. "He didn't steal anything," he said flatly, his voice firm, steady, as if he'd practiced it on the way over. Aldridge's brow furrowed. "Malachi, this isn't your meeting." "It is now," Malachi shot back, "because I know exactly what happened." The room fell silent. Malachi stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Vincent sat near Malik's locker this morning. I saw him hold something in his hand when he walked out, looked like jewelry. He passed by Malik's bag, paused for maybe 3 seconds, then kept walking. You can check the timestamp. 3 seconds. That's all it takes." Coach Donovan shifted uncomfortably. Dean Killian adjusted his glasses. Aldridge, however, remained perfectly still. "Are you suggesting a student planted evidence to frame another?" "I'm not suggesting," Malachi said. "I'm stating it. Vincent put that ring in Malik's bag." Aldridge leaned back slowly in his chair. "Do you have proof?" "Do you have proof he didn't?" Malachi replied, eyes burning. "Because so far, all you've said is that something was found in a bag. Not that he put it there. Not that he even touched it." Aldridge exhaled through his nose, long and measured. "We have an image problem, Mr. Harris." Malachi blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," Aldridge said carefully, "this school has a reputation. One we must uphold for our donors, for our alumni, for our history. Every decision we make must be weighed not just for its truth, but for how it reflects on Elden Crest. Malachi stared at him, disbelieving. So, you'll punish him for something he didn't do, just to protect how the school looks? No one's being punished yet, Killian interjected again, his voice tight. We're simply being cautious. But not cautious with Vincent, Malik said finally, speaking for the first time in minutes. You haven't questioned him. You haven't asked why a 3-generation heirloom went missing in the first place. You just followed it to our bag and stopped thinking. Aldridge's eyes flicked to the ring, then to the case. We'll review the footage again, he said. Thoroughly. Malachi didn't budge. Then do it now, while we're still in the room. There was a long pause. Aldridge considered it. Then finally, he nodded to the security supervisor, who pulled out a tablet from his leather case and opened the video files. The room grew quiet as the footage played, first from the gym corridor, then the locker room. The timestamp Malachi mentioned appeared. 8 hours, 12 minutes, and 41 seconds. Vincent Langford stepped past Malik's locker, glanced around, bent slightly, 3 seconds, and kept walking. No direct view of the bag, but enough of a gesture to raise questions. Killian's expression darkened. Aldridge's jaw tightened. Not conclusive, the headmaster said slowly, but worth investigating further. Malik stood motionless. His heart pounded harder than it had outside. Am I suspended? He asked. Aldridge didn't answer right away. He glanced at Killian, then at the security officer. For now, no, he said finally, pending further review. The brothers left the room in silence, but their steps were deliberate, controlled. They walked side by side across the quad, past marble arches and perfectly mowed lawns, past students who barely looked up from their conversations. They weren't going to believe us, Malik muttered. Not until they had no choice. They still don't, Malachi said. They just don't want the noise, yet. Vincent's not done, Malik added. He thinks this was just the beginning. Malachi stopped walking and turned toward the East Wing, where the Langfords had donated the newly built Science Center. Then let's be ready when he makes his next move, he said. Because we're not the ones who should be afraid of what's coming. The following week brought with it one of the most celebrated events at Elden Crest Academy. The Founders' Convocation, an annual ceremony that honored academic achievement, legacy contributions, and the spirit of the institution. For most students, it was a moment to dress sharp, applaud familiar names, and reinforce the hierarchy that Elden Crest so delicately upheld under the guise of tradition. For Malik and Malachi Harris, it was just another reminder of how deep the roots of exclusion ran beneath the school's polished marble floors. They had been told to report to the auditorium with the rest of the student body. No special instructions, no backstage passes, nothing to suggest that their recent academic achievements, tied for top scores across 5 AP courses, would be recognized. Still, Malik brought his blazer pressed, and Malachi had gone over his tie twice, just in case, because part of surviving Elden Crest was keeping hope tucked away like a secret. You didn't show it, but you let it breathe just enough to keep going. The auditorium was grand, designed more like an opera hall than a school facility. The wood-paneled walls, velvet curtains, and hanging chandeliers all whispered of old money and unbroken lineage. As students filed into their seats, the faculty filled the stage with solemn pride. Headmaster Aldridge stood at the podium, flanked by several board members in dark suits. Behind them, a large screen displayed a digital slideshow titled, Excellence Through Legacy. The twins sat midway down the center aisle, sandwiched between students who neither looked at them nor acknowledged their presence. The ceremony began with the national anthem, followed by a choral performance from the honors ensemble. Then came the awards: academic distinction, community outreach, innovation in STEM. One by one, names were called. Applause followed. Students walked up the stage with rehearsed humility, shook hands, received certificates, posed briefly for photographs, and returned to their seats. It was formulaic, predictable, and yet, when the final name in the academic distinction category was read, Jameson Whitlock, who had a GPA lower than both twins, Malik and Malachi, exchanged a glance that carried no surprise, just confirmation. There was no mention of Malik's perfect score in AP Physics, no nod to Malachi's published essay in the Regional Historical Review, no acknowledgement of the Harris twins at all, not even a photo in the Students Who Inspire segment that looped quietly behind the presenters. And when the ceremony ended, students stood in small groups, smiling for family members and congratulating each other, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if silence was just another part of the pageantry. Malik and Malachi stood up slowly, neither speaking. Their silence, too, had become part of the performance, a way to endure what couldn't yet be challenged. Later that day, in the dining hall, a junior named Olivia Tran approached their table cautiously. She was known for being sharp, outspoken, and unafraid to challenge norms, at least until now. She placed her tray across from the twins, leaned forward, and said, "You both know that was deliberate, right?" Malik raised an eyebrow. "You mean being invisible in front of 500 people?" "Yeah, we caught that." Olivia's voice dropped. "I checked the honor roll board last week. You two topped every major academic category. They didn't just forget you. They scrubbed you." Malachi looked at her carefully. "And you're telling us this because it's wrong," she replied, frustration creeping into her tone. "And someone should say something." Malik tilted his head. "Someone like you?" "Maybe," Olivia said. "If I brought it up at the next student council meeting, or even in the school paper." Her voice trailed off as she imagined the consequences. Malachi finished the sentence for her. "They'd make sure your grade slipped, or your access to advanced classes vanished, or your college recommendation got delayed for paperwork reasons." Olivia didn't argue. She just looked down at her tray. "But it still doesn't make it right." Malik's tone was quiet. "No, it just makes it familiar." The next day, Olivia tried anyway. During a Q&A session with the Dean of Academic Affairs, held in the student forum room, she raised her hand and asked, why were Malik and Malachi Harris not recognized at convocation, despite having the highest academic records of our year? The room went still. A beat passed before Dean Killian gave a faint smile. The awards committee uses a holistic evaluation that goes beyond GPA alone. Sometimes, metrics like engagement, community fit, and alumni compatibility are also considered. "So community fit means not being black," someone whispered from the back, too low to trace. The dean didn't react. Olivia sat down slowly, her heart pounding, unsure whether she'd made a difference or just painted a target on her back. By the end of the week, she found out. Her schedule had changed. Her AP Calculus class, where she was second only to Malachi, was replaced with Applied Math Enrichment, a remedial class designed for underperforming students. Her guidance counselor apologized vaguely. "It's probably a clerical error. These things happen." But she knew. Everyone knew. Students began speaking to her less in the hallways. Her inbox, once full of group project invites and club notifications, was suddenly quiet. Olivia didn't cry. She didn't rant. She didn't even complain. She walked into Applied Math Enrichment, took the empty seat in the back, and opened her notebook like it was any other day. But the message had been received across campus. Challenge the system, and the system will swallow you whole. Back in their dorm that evening, Malik stared at the ceiling while Malachi typed notes at his desk. "You saw what they did to Olivia?" Malik asked. "Yeah," Malachi said without looking up. "She did what nobody else would. And now they've buried her." Malik's voice was tight. "Just like they tried to bury us." "Not buried," Malachi corrected. "She's still breathing. Still here. That's something." Malik rolled onto his side, staring at the wall. "What if they come for us next?" Malachi finally turned, his face calm but serious. "They already did. They just weren't expecting us to stay standing." The silence between them wasn't empty. It was dense, like the air before a storm, the kind of silence that said more than words ever could. Malik's hand closed around the folded paper he had found earlier, a copy of the original honor roll, posted briefly online before being taken down. It had both their names. Top two. The proof still existed, however faint. "They're not going to stop," he murmured. Malachi's gaze didn't waver. "Neither will we." They didn't need to say more, because the next time Elden Crest tried to erase them, it would take more than silence to make them disappear. The days following Olivia's quiet exile carried silence that was louder than any protest. Hallways felt tighter, conversations shorter, and even the air around the twins seemed to press inward, as if the building itself was trying to suffocate what it couldn't control. Malik and Malachi knew this was not the end, it was escalation, a message sent through inaction and silence. So when the announcement came that both of them had been selected for the school's annual academic symposium, no one, including the twins themselves, believed it was a coincidence. The event was a public relations staple at Elden Crest, held in the historic Chapman Lecture Hall, and attended by trustees, faculty, and select parents. It was meant to showcase diverse academic excellence, a phrase that sounded like progress, but often rang hollow under scrutiny. Malik and Malachi prepared like they always did, with precision, focus, and purpose. But they also knew to brace for something more subtle. The knives here were never held in the open. They were hidden beneath smiles and applause. Malachi's segment was scheduled as part of the debate round under the theme, Access and Merit in Modern Education. He stood at the podium in the center of the stage, flanked by 3 other students from legacy families. His opposing speaker was none other than Tobias Carrington, son of a hedge fund executive and former alumni board chair. The debate moderator, Mrs. Greaves, greeted the audience with exaggerated warmth before reading aloud the question for Malachi's opening statement. "Mr. Harris, how do you reconcile your academic success with the reality that the system you're benefiting from was never designed for someone like you? In a way, haven't you been rescued by it?" There was no outrage in the room, no shock, just a low hum of polite anticipation, as if everyone were eager to see how the boy with no pedigree would navigate such a loaded question. Malachi paused, letting the words sink in. His eyes moved slowly across the faces of the judges, 3 middle-aged white faculty members and 1 trustee. Their expressions were blank, but their eyes betrayed them. Narrowed, expectant, testing. Malachi leaned forward slightly and adjusted the mic. "I wasn't rescued," he said evenly. "I adapted." The room stilled. This system wasn't made for me, that's true. But it wasn't made for merit either. It was made for mirrors, so people could see themselves reflected and feel safe in what they already know. A murmur passed through the back rows, quick and contained. Malachi continued. "If I succeed here, it's not because someone opened the door out of charity. It's because I picked the lock with everything you didn't see. Late nights, code books, lessons from people who don't have buildings named after them. And if that threatens your idea of merit, then maybe it's not merit you were protecting." Tobias shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The judges didn't speak. They didn't clap. But their pens moved faster after that. Later that afternoon, it was Malik's turn to present his solo project, an analytical breakdown of demographic bias in standardized testing. He stepped onto the stage, notes in hand, confident in his preparation. He had practiced this talk a dozen times, knew every line, every pivot, every slide. But as he adjusted the microphone and began speaking, a faint crackle cut through his first sentence. Then another. By his 3rd slide, the mic had gone completely dead. He paused, tapping it twice. "Nothing. Is this thing on?" he asked. A tech aide near the stage looked up briefly, shrugged, and gestured toward the cable beneath the podium. Malik crouched, checked the connection, and found it loosely hanging by a frayed wire. He glanced toward the side stage. No one moved. The faculty tech monitor sat at his station, looking bored, sipping coffee. The silence stretched. A few people in the crowd chuckled. Malik straightened, cleared his throat, and projected his voice the way his father taught him, full and low, from the diaphragm. "I'll continue without the mic," he said. "It's not the first time my voice has been ignored." A few heads turned. A couple of students exchanged glances. Malik pressed forward, loud and unflinching, delivering his entire presentation with clarity and fire. But the strain was real. The effort of projecting every syllable across the vast lecture hall wore at him. By the end, his throat ached, and his hands trembled slightly from the adrenaline. There was no applause when he stepped down, just the rustle of papers and the faint scratching of pens against clipboards. The next group, a trio of white students, took the stage with practiced ease. Their microphone turned on flawlessly. The screen lit up in sync. The sound system purred like it had been waiting for them. Backstage, Malik stood near the exit door, breathing slowly, watching the crowd move on without pause. Malachi joined him, his expression unreadable. "They cut it," Malik said flatly. "On purpose." "I know," Malachi replied. "But you still finished." Malik shook his head. "Does it even matter?" Malachi's voice dropped. "It will. Maybe not to them. But to someone watching, it did." In the days following the symposium, there were no public acknowledgments, no emails, no nods in the hallway. But they noticed the shift. Small, deliberate. The way faculty avoided eye contact. The way students spoke just a little softer when passing them. The way one junior, Devin Harris, no relation, quickly closed his laptop when Malik entered the library, as if guilty for reviewing a transcript of the debate. Malik sat across from him anyway. Devin didn't say a word. But before leaving, he slid a folded paper across the table. On it was a quote. Malachi's words, handwritten in careful print. "Maybe it's not merit you were protecting." Malik folded the note and tucked it into his book. Meanwhile, back in the dorm, the twins found their doors marked, not with graffiti, but with a maintenance slip stating that their room was scheduled for inspection due to system irregularities. They weren't surprised. The school couldn't silence them directly, so it would try through inconvenience. Malachi peeled the slip off the door without a word and tossed it in the trash. "Let them come," he said. Malik nodded, closing the door behind them. They didn't need to brace for what came next. They already knew it was coming. The following Monday began like any other, at least until Malik opened his locker and felt the cold hollowness of absence. Books gone. Notebooks, flash drives, his carefully organized folders, missing. All that remained was a single torn scrap of paper taped to the back wall, its edges curled and corners grimy, as if it had been touched too many times by hands that didn't care. In crude but elegant cursive it read, "Elden is no place for temporary guests." His breath caught, not in panic, but in recognition. This was not a prank. This was precision. He stepped back slowly, scanning the hallway for anyone watching, anyone smirking in the shadows. But all he saw were the usual blurred shapes moving past, avoiding his gaze, pretending this wasn't happening. He turned to Malachi, who stood just a few feet away, staring at his own locker in eerie stillness. His was empty too. The same note, same handwriting, same message. "They didn't just take our things," Malik muttered. "They erased us." Malachi didn't speak. He simply tore the note off the locker wall and folded it with the same care one might reserve for a legal document. Then he slid it into his pocket and shut the door. By noon, word had spread, but in whispers, carefully measured, strategically blurred. No one said they knew what happened, but everyone knew what it meant. The message wasn't just written in ink. It was engraved into the silence of those who looked away, those who should have spoken but instead checked their watches or tapped their phones. Pretending the world, beyond the Harris twins, still made sense. No teachers addressed the theft. No emails were sent. Even the security office claimed their cameras had glitched sometime between Sunday night and early Monday morning. Technical interference, the supervisor mumbled with practiced indifference. "We'll look into it." But Malik knew better. So did Malachi. This wasn't a break-in. It was a warning. And worse, it was sanctioned. The same day, Malachi received an unexpected invitation, an embossed envelope tucked into his homeroom binder, bearing the gold seal of the student council. Inside, a handwritten note welcomed him to a special committee formed to support diversity initiatives and amplify underrepresented voices. It sounded noble, strategic, almost flattering, but something about the timing felt off. Malachi said nothing to Malik until that evening. "They want me in a room," he said while reviewing their shared calendar. "Boardroom A, tomorrow during third period. Special session." Malik gave him a look. "You think it's a trap?" "I think," Malachi replied carefully, "they want to feel better about themselves. And locking someone in a room full of people who don't see him as equal is its own kind of punishment." Malik leaned back. "Still going?" "Of course," Malachi said. "Let them show me exactly what they are." The next day, Malachi arrived at boardroom 10 minutes early. The hallway was empty, doors lining the corridor with polished brass handles and tiny placards etched in formal script. He knocked once, then entered. The room was dimly lit, a long table set with nameplates, bottled water, and folders. He found his name at the far end, Malachi Harris, Community Inclusion Liaison. No one else had arrived. He took his seat and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The hallway remained silent. He stood, walked to the door, and turned the handle. It didn't move. Locked. He checked again, then tried the latch. Nothing. "Hello," he called out, knocking once more. No reply. He knocked louder, then pounded. The sound bounced through the hallway, hollow and unanswered. Somewhere far off, a bell rang, signaling the start of third period. He stepped back from the door, blinking slowly. He knew what this was. Not a joke, not a mistake, a performance. They hadn't asked for his voice. They'd built a stage just to prove they didn't need it. 35 minutes later, the door opened. A secretary poked her head in. "Oh," she said with mock surprise, "we didn't realize you were in here already." The meeting was rescheduled to next week. "Didn't anyone tell you?" Malachi said nothing, just gathered the untouched folder in front of him and walked out past her without speaking. She didn't follow. Malik met him near the library steps, jaw clenched. "You good?" he asked. Malachi handed him the folder. Nothing inside. Blank agenda. Empty forms. Just my name at the bottom. Malik opened the folder, brows furrowing. "They made you a liaison. To a room with no voices." "Exactly," Malachi said. "They didn't silence me. They ghosted me. Made me the only noise in a room meant to echo." That night, someone slipped another note under their dorm door. This one wasn't handwritten. It was printed, typed, folded clean. No fingerprints. No markings. Just a single line, loud enough to hear, still not worth answering. Malik held the paper over the waste bin, but didn't drop it. He read it again, then a third time. "They're not trying to get us to leave," he said slowly. "They're trying to get us to forget we were ever here." Malachi nodded, his voice low. "They want to wear us down until we stop correcting them. Stop showing up. Stop existing loud." Malik's eyes darkened. "Then we don't get quiet. Not for them. Not now." And in the quiet hum of the campus night, beneath the perfectly lit arches and carefully trimmed hedges, two boys sat side by side, not speaking, but not silent either. Because silence was exactly what Elden Crest expected. By the time winter exam week arrived, the quiet tension surrounding the Harris twins had settled into something more insidious: expectation. No one said it aloud, but it hung in the air, laced into whispers and sidelong glances. This would be the test that exposed them. The real Elden Crest, the one veiled behind committee smiles and curated diversity brochures, still clung to the fantasy that the twins were anomalies, lucky breaks, statistical quirks that could be outperformed when it really mattered. But what they didn't know was that Malik and Malachi had been preparing for this long before they ever set foot on campus. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. Because you don't play fair in a system built to see you lose. You build your own system. Malik's final exam for computational theory was scheduled for a foggy Thursday morning, held in the Newton Tech Lab under the watchful eye of Dr. Silas Redgrave, a man known more for his distaste of disruption than for brilliance. The test itself was digital, designed to gauge not just answers, but the logic behind them, using the Academy's internal coding platform, an outdated interface that hadn't evolved in years. Malik logged in calmly, the keyboard cool beneath his fingers. He didn't just complete the exam, he rewrote it. Instead of answering in Python or Java or C++, Malik wrote every single response in an original cipher language, a hybrid syntax of logic and linguistic abstraction he had spent months crafting during late-night sessions in their dorm. He didn't label it, didn't explain it, just wrote. He executed proofs that nested recursive functions inside syntactic poetry. He solved data set anomalies by creating predictive logic trees that read like fractal blueprints. Every line was not only correct, it was transcendent. When Dr. Redgrave opened the grading console later that evening, he stared at the screen for nearly 2 minutes before uttering his first word. "What is this?" The test suite couldn't even compile Malik's responses. The system flagged every line as an error, not because it was wrong, but because it had no frame of reference to judge innovation it didn't understand. Redgrave called in another instructor, then a third. Finally, they emailed Malik, requesting an immediate in-person debrief. When he arrived, they asked him to walk them through his logic. Malik pulled out a whiteboard pen and spent 45 minutes explaining the structural principles of his cipher language, how it reduced syntax load by 60%, eliminated redundancy chains, and allowed for self-validating conditional structures. When he finished, the room was silent. Redgrave, pale and quiet, leaned back slowly and said, "Where did you learn this?" Malik smiled. "Nowhere. I built it." At the same time, across campus, Malachi was seated in the lecture theater for the first round of Elden Crest's Internal Physics Olympiad. It was considered the apex of academic competition on campus, overseen by a panel of faculty judges and representatives from external scholarship boards. The exam booklet was thick, detailed, and supposedly original. Malachi flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable. On question 7, his lips pressed into a thin line. By question 11, his hands stopped moving. He sat back and looked at the test with quiet disbelief. Because he recognized it, not just the structure, but the wording, the phrasing, the precise theoretical scenario. It wasn't just familiar, it was his. Malachi had authored a paper the previous year on relativistic inertia in fluid particle systems, published under his name through a youth fellowship with MIT's Open Research Exchange. It had made modest waves online, but wasn't widely circulated beyond specialized communities. And yet, staring at the question now, formatted differently, numbers tweaked, but core logic identical, there was no doubt. Elden Crest had plagiarized him. When his time was up, Malachi didn't turn in his exam like the others. He walked directly to the proctor's desk and requested to speak to the Academic Integrity Committee. The professor, caught off guard, mumbled something about scheduling, but Malachi insisted. "You'll want to hear this sooner rather than later," he said, handing over his exam with a folded copy of his MIT paper tucked inside. Compare question 11. That afternoon, the committee convened in a private conference room. Malachi entered alone, dressed in his school blazer, posture upright, eyes steady. They began with formality, asked him to state his claim clearly. He did. Then they asked for proof. He laid it out, slide by slide, section by section. Not just the structural similarities, but the verbatim sequences, the constants, the manipulated data sets. "This isn't coincidence," he said. "This is direct copy, with my name stripped from it." There was no argument, no way to spin it. The room fell into still silence as the academic board reviewed the final slide, a side-by-side comparison of the original and the altered version. A faculty member at the end of the table removed his glasses, rubbing his temples. "Do you know how this could have happened?" another asked. "That's your job to find out," Malachi replied. News didn't break quickly at Elden Crest. It seeped slow and uneasy, like a foundation beginning to crack beneath its own weight. Whispers turned to questions. Questions turned to glances. And glances eventually turned to unease. Because the truth wasn't just out, it had been hiding in plain sight. Malik and Malachi had merely kept up. They had outbuilt the very framework others used to define brilliance. And suddenly, the myth that had protected those in power, the belief that legacy equaled merit, began to waver. In the dining hall, students watched as Malik opened his laptop and demonstrated his cipher language on a public screen. In physics, Malachi was handed back his exam with a note. No score assigned. subject of investigation. Teachers became quieter, classmates more cautious. But it wasn't fear they radiated, it was recognition. And for the first time since their arrival, the Harris twins weren't being looked past. They were being seen. The reverberations of Malik and Malachi's academic revelations hadn't even finished echoing through the marble halls of Elden Crest before the school's leadership convened an emergency meeting. The official pretext was curricular integrity review, but everyone knew the truth had outgrown its leash. The school board, normally slow-moving and steeped in formality, gathered in the great chamber with clipped urgency. Long rows of oak chairs were filled with deans, senior faculty, and trustees wearing tight smiles and nervous eyes. Headmaster Aldridge stood at the head of the room, flanked by Dean Killian and 2 other board members. He cleared his throat as the murmurs subsided. "This meeting," he began, "is to address the recent allegations of academic impropriety and the resulting unrest among our student body." Before he could finish his sentence, the heavy doors at the back of the chamber swung open, not violently, not rushed, but with a quiet authority that made every head turn. The footsteps that followed echoed with unmistakable precision. A tall man in full uniform entered, his presence cutting through the tension like a blade, his shoulders squared, his medals displayed not with pomp, but with the unspoken weight of earned command. He did not hesitate, did not falter. He walked straight down the center aisle, every step announcing that the meeting had just shifted out of school's control. Malik and Malachi stood silently at the edge of the room, watching. They did not smile. They did not wave. They simply nodded, because they had known this moment would come. "Colonel Elijah Harris," Headmaster Aldridge said slowly, his voice uncertain for the first time in recent memory. "We weren't aware you'd be attending." Elijah didn't answer at first. He placed a black leather case on the table before him, unlatched it, and withdrew a set of documents. Only then did he speak. "I wasn't planning to," he said, his voice low and steady, every syllable sharpened by command. "But circumstances have made it necessary." A few members of the board shifted in their seats. Elijah set the papers down deliberately. "As of this morning, I've formally submitted withdrawal of the federal research grant allocated to Elden Crest Academy, a sum of $5 million over the next 4 years." The room erupted in whispers. One trustee leaned toward Aldridge, hissing into his ear. Another tried to speak, but was silenced by Elijah's raised hand. "You may protest," he said coolly, "but this is not a threat. It's a conclusion." The grant, earmarked through a joint initiative between the Department of Defense and the Department of Education, was contingent on institutional compliance with national academic equity standards. Your recent conduct, your systemic exclusion, and the documented acts of targeted academic suppression, these are not rumors. They are facts, and they've triggered a full federal investigation into discriminatory practices, beginning right here, at Elden Crest. Dean Killian stood abruptly. "Colonel Harris, with all due respect, these are severe accusations. They are documented truths," Elijah interrupted, his tone never rising, only tightening like a noose. "One son created a new programming syntax that your staff failed to recognize because it wasn't in your textbooks. The other exposed plagiarism committed by your own Olympiad committee. And instead of rewarding their excellence, you responded with sabotage, silence, and systemic erasure." A cold hush fell over the room. No one dared interject. Elijah's eyes moved slowly from face to face. "These are not boys you tolerated," he said. "These are men you underestimated. And now the spotlight you tried to dim is being redirected. Not just on them, but on you." Headmaster Aldridge stepped forward, grasping for control. "Surely we can resolve this internally, Colonel. The school has always valued its partnerships. Then perhaps you should have treated those partners as equals," Elijah cut in, "instead of guests." His voice, though calm, pressed down on every syllable with the weight of command honed across battlefields, briefing rooms, and congressional hearings. "I'm not just their father," he added. "I'm a senior advisor to the Department of Education's National Equity Oversight Board. And as of now, Elden Crest is under review." The boardroom felt smaller suddenly. the walls closer, the air thinner. For years, the school had stood untouched, perched atop its reputation like a castle above the clouds, safe from criticism, insulated by legacy and wealth. But now, the drawbridge had lowered, and standing at its gates was someone they could neither silence nor ignore. Malik stepped forward quietly, holding out a folder. "This is a copy of the original MIT paper Malachi published," he said, placing it beside the documents Elijah had delivered. "And here's the modified test your faculty tried to pass off as their own. You wanted proof. Now you have it." Malachi joined him, sliding a USB drive across the table. "This has recordings, dated correspondence, and student statements. If you need more, we have backups. Copies in safe locations. And we've already submitted them to the Office of Civil Rights." A tremor passed through the boardroom like a shifting fault line. No one reached for the files. No one met their eyes. Because the truth wasn't just in the room. It was in the air, thick and inescapable. And suddenly, the polished grandeur of Elden Crest looked less like legacy and more like a facade. Elijah closed his briefcase slowly. "You had your chance to protect these students," he said, turning toward the door. "You chose to protect yourselves. And now we'll see how that decision holds up under the weight of daylight." And with that, he left. No raised voice, no threat needed. Just the calm certainty of a man who knew that justice, when given room to breathe, carried a power institutions could not withstand. By the time the headlines hit the national morning broadcasts, Elden Crest Academy was no longer the ivory tower it had spent generations pretending to be. What once stood as a monument to tradition, legacy, and carefully curated excellence had, almost overnight, become a symbol of institutional decay, a school built on exclusion, now stripped bare beneath the eyes of a country watching with sharpened attention. It started with a single press release from the Department of Education's Civil Rights Division confirming the launch of a federal investigation into systemic discrimination at Elden Crest. But within 48 hours, the fallout escalated, dragging names and reputations into the light, including those who had once believed themselves too powerful to fall. And at the center of that reckoning stood Vincent Langford, the boy who once strutted through hallways as if the marble was carved for his footsteps, the one who had smirked as he framed Malik for theft, now found his name plastered across digital news tickers and front-page articles. Congressman's son expelled amid discrimination probe. One headline read. Another was more direct. Langford legacy collapses under federal scrutiny. The expulsion was swift, decisive, and final. The school board had no room left to maneuver, no favor strong enough to counterbalance the weight of the evidence. Vincent's academic record was wiped from public accolades, his leadership roles revoked, his college applications flagged for review. But the real blow came not from the school. It came from his father, Congressman Ronald Langford, known for decades as a stoic and unyielding political figure, had built his career on discipline and dominance. He rarely apologized, never backpedaled. Yet on a gray Wednesday morning, he stepped behind a podium in Washington, flanked by aides who looked as though they were witnessing the collapse of a dynasty. Cameras clicked, microphones buzzed. The silence before his speech stretched thin with anticipation. "My son's actions," he began, voice steady but stripped of its usual arrogance, "were unacceptable. The values reflected in his conduct do not align with those I claim to stand for. And for that, I offer a public apology, not only to the Harris family, but to every student who has felt unseen, unheard, or unwanted in spaces that promised equity and failed to deliver it." The press didn't clap. They didn't need to. The footage alone was damning enough. The congressman's carefully tailored image cracked in real time, his power punctured by the very silence he had once weaponized. And across the country, people watched not with glee, but with the solemn satisfaction that came when truth finally outran privilege. Back at Elden Crest, the walls were closing in faster than administrators could brace. The National Academic Alliance, a body that had once held Elden Crest as one of its founding institutions, released an emergency statement. Effective immediately, Elden Crest Academy status as a certified member of the National Academic Alliance is hereby suspended for a period of 2 years, pending completion of all recommended corrective actions related to systemic discrimination, inequitable resource allocation, and failure to uphold academic integrity standards. The statement hit harder than any federal audit. Membership in the Alliance wasn't just a badge. It was the foundation of Elden Crest's national standing. It secured their funding pipelines, their Ivy League pipeline recommendations, their research grants, and even their prestige in international academic rankings. Without it, Elden Crest wasn't a flagship. It was just another private institution with a damaged name and fewer doors open than closed. The school's website, once pristine and manicured with promotional videos, now bore a bland, stripped-down version of itself. Its leadership section reduced to a placeholder image. Its admissions portal marked with a notice, currently under structural review. Students whispered in corners. Parents flooded the administration office with withdrawal requests and refund demands. Alumni quietly scrubbed the school from their LinkedIn pages. And the boardroom where Elijah Harris had once delivered his quiet ultimatum now became a battlefield of internal collapse. Headmaster Aldridge, once untouchable, submitted a vague letter of early retirement, citing health concerns. Dean Killian requested a leave of absence, though everyone knew it was a prelude to dismissal. The senior faculty split into camps, those who wanted to cooperate with investigators, and those who still believed they could salvage what was left. But the Harris twins weren't watching the chaos to revel in it. They were watching to ensure it wasn't forgotten. Malik took detailed notes of every statement the school issued, every step they took in damage control. Malachi compiled a digital archive of their journey, every documented slight, every buried achievement, every proof of the system's intent to erase them. Not to gloat, not to relive it, but to remember. Because history, they knew, was only useful when it was honest. And honesty had never come cheap in places like Elden Crest. Even students who had once sneered or stayed silent began to shift. Some apologized directly. Others simply started treating them with a respect they hadn't earned, but were now trying to. In the library, Malik noticed a once hostile classmate carefully returning a book to the tech shelf he never used before. In the cafeteria, Malachi overheard a group of juniors debating the meaning of systemic privilege without sarcasm. Small signs, but real. The storm had cracked the surface. Now it was beginning to seep deeper. The school's walls were still standing, but the foundation had shifted, and everyone inside could feel it. Weeks passed since the disciplinary actions and national fallout, and though the campus at Elden Crest still bore the scars of everything it had tried to hide, something new had begun to bloom beneath the surface. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sudden, and it certainly wasn't perfect. But it was there, in the longer pauses between conversations, in the more careful words chosen by students who used to laugh too easily, and in the awkward but honest greetings exchanged between people who had once refused to see each other. Change had not swept through like a cleansing wave. It had crept in like sunlight cracking through a broken ceiling, slow and uninvited, but impossible to ignore. Malik and Malachi walked the halls now with the same posture they always had, upright, steady, unashamed. But the stares they met were different. Not fearful, not hostile. Curious, cautious, and sometimes even respectful. One Friday afternoon, as the final bell echoed through the main corridor, Malik received a handwritten note, sealed in an unmarked envelope. It was tucked discreetly between the pages of his chemistry textbook in his locker. No signature, no return address. The handwriting was unfamiliar, neat, deliberate, unsure. It read simply, "If you're not angry anymore, I'd like to speak. I'll be outside the greenhouse at 4 p.m. If not, I understand." Malik showed the note to Malachi without a word, and they exchanged a glance heavy with hesitation. But when the time came, Malik went. The greenhouse stood near the edge of campus, surrounded by overgrown ivy and a quiet that didn't feel suffocating anymore. Just still, and waiting near the side wall, back straight, hands folded in front of him, stood Headmaster Aldridge. Gone was the clipped formality and unbending posture. He looked smaller, less composed, dressed not in his tailored jacket, but in a simple brown coat that made him look less like a man of rank and more like someone trying to be approachable. "Malik," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "Thank you for coming." Malik stood with his arms crossed. "You asked to speak." Aldridge nodded, then reached into his coat and pulled out a single piece of paper. "This is a blank form. No school header, no title. I'm not here to control the narrative. I'm here to listen. If you and your brother are willing to write down what needs to change, systems, staff, policies, anything, I will take that list to the board myself. No edits, no filters. I'm not asking you to forgive me, but I am asking for a chance to do something right." For a moment, Malik said nothing. The wind rustled the nearby trees, sending a few leaves skittering across the pavement between them. Finally, he took the page and folded it once. "We'll think about it," he said. "And if we write something, you better be ready to follow through." "No excuses," Aldridge said quietly. "Not this time." That evening, Malik laid the paper between him and Malachi on their dorm table. Neither of them said a word for several minutes. They just stared at it, the blank space somehow more daunting than any insult they'd endured. Finally, Malachi picked up a pen. "Start with admissions policy?" he asked. Malik nodded. "And faculty training. Real training, not that 2-hour workshop nonsense." Malachi added a bullet point. They worked for hours, not with vengeance, but with purpose. Not to punish, but to prevent. And when the list was done, it didn't feel like an act of rebellion. It felt like a blueprint. A week later, another envelope arrived. This one bore a military seal. Inside, a letter written in tense, rigid cursive spanned 2 pages. It was from Vincent Langford. Malik read it slowly, eyes narrowing as he took in every word. "I hated you," the letter began, "not because you were wrong, but because you made it harder to pretend I was right. When I realized I feared you, it wasn't because you were violent. It was because you stood still when I tried to shake you. You didn't break. That's what made me see it. You were never beneath me. I just didn't know how to exist without someone beneath me." The letter described Vincent's removal from Elden Crest, his entrance into a military rehabilitation program focused on moral accountability, and the work he was doing now: cleaning barracks, studying ethics, attending weekly sessions with veterans who spoke about honor in terms that had nothing to do with power. The final paragraph struck the deepest chord. "I still flinch when I hear your name, not because I'm afraid of you hurting me, but because I know I hurt something better than me. I don't expect you to answer. I don't even expect forgiveness. I just needed to say that the person I was doesn't get the last word." Malik folded the letter slowly, then slid it across the desk to Malachi. They read it in silence, the air thick with things too complicated for immediate judgment. Forgiveness, they had learned, wasn't a gift given easily or quickly, but it was a weakness. It was choosing not to carry someone else's shame on your shoulders. It was a quiet decision to stop the cycle, not out of surrender, but out of strength. Spring arrived early that year. The trees bloomed pink and gold around the campus. The school adopted new protocols. The investigation continued, but so did the slow, uneven work of rebuilding. Malik and Malachi were invited to sit in on advisory panels, not as tokens, but as equals. Their list, once scribbled in frustration, had become policy draft language. No one pretended the school had transformed, but no one could pretend it hadn't changed either. One afternoon, as they walked past the library, a freshman hesitated before calling out, "Mr. Harris?" They both turned. "Thank you," he said, his voice shaking a little. "For what you did." Malik smiled faintly. "We just stopped staying quiet," he replied. "That's something anyone can do." The semester ended not with a ceremony, but with an open forum celebration where students shared stories of overcoming, some academic, some personal. Malik and Malachi didn't take the stage. They sat in the audience, listening, watching, and knowing that what they had done wasn't just for themselves. It was a fight they had inherited, endured, and passed forward. As the sun dipped low behind the school buildings, casting long shadows across the lawn, Malik leaned toward his brother. Think they'll keep their promises? Malachi's gaze remained on the horizon. They don't have a choice anymore. Malik nodded. Still, we'll be watching. And they would be. Always. Because the story wasn't theirs alone. But what they had written into its margins could never be erased. If this story moved you, consider subscribing for more powerful narratives that challenge injustice and celebrate resilience. What part of the story hit you the hardest? Was it the quiet resistance, the turning point in the exam room, or the final moment of redemption? And where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. We'd love to know who's standing with Malik and Malachi. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter.